How are you all doing? You're all liars. Turn to the person to your left or your right and ask them how they're doing. Raise your hand if the person to your left or to your right said good, great, fine, or okay. Yeah, they're liars too. You see, my brothers and sisters, we have been taught by our world, we've been taught by our parents, we've been taught by our culture, that it's only when you're strong are you okay. We aren't allowed to actually admit that we're weak. So we don't. Our lives might literally be crumbling. And yet if someone asks how you're doing, we respond, good, fine, I'm okay, yeah. And it's a lie. We maybe experienced tremendous sickness, or someone may have died, or a friend is diagnosed with cancer. We've lost our job. We're suffering from depression. Our husband or our wife is an alcoholic. We're dealing with issues of abuse or neglect or frustration. We have an eating disorder. The list could be endless. How are you doing? Good. Yeah, really good. We've been convinced that it's only when we're strong are we valuable. That the weak don't truly count. Our second reading today, St. Paul is writing his second letter to the Corinthians. It's chapter 12. Every morning when I spend time in my holy hour, I actually read this passage. In my prayer book, I actually have typed out certain verses that I read every single day, and this is one of them. I think understanding St. Paul's second letter to the Corinthians, chapter 12, is a game changer. So much of our life, we are convinced that we have to be strong, and St. Paul is saying, no, that's wrong. In fact, you'll truly be happy and you'll truly be in a relationship with the Lord when you admit the fact that we're weak, that we're empty, and that we're broken. So in its context, St. Paul has asked the Lord to remove suffering from his life. He doesn't say what the suffering is, he describes it as a thorn in his side, but there is suffering in Paul's life, and Paul has begged the Lord to take this suffering away. But God doesn't. Raise your hand if you've begged God to answer a prayer in your life, and he hasn't. So St. Paul comes to this revelation of the fact that I've asked this prayer again and again and again, but God hasn't changed it. But what God has done is that in my brokenness, he's given me the grace to endure what I don't like in my life. He's not changing, he's not taking away, he's not healing whatever it might be, but he is giving me the grace and the strength to endure it. But the only way that Paul can receive that grace is by him admitting that he's broken, that he's weak, and that his life is a wreck. And the same is true for all of us. Until we can actually admit that we are weak, we don't need God. In a very certain sense, behind this whole mentality in our world that everything's okay and I'm strong and I can do anything, is this an idea that we don't need God. Because who really needs God? The weak, the broken, and those in need. And until we see ourselves as one of them, which our world says you don't want to be them, until we acknowledge that that's who we are, we can't really have a relationship with God. And thus, in a very cliche way, I have the phrase in my life, to seek to be weak. That before the throne of God, we have to literally seek to be weak. And once we acknowledge the fact that we really are weak, God can do absolutely amazing things in our life. Raise your hand if you know somebody in your life that struggles with alcohol. Notice how I didn't ask the question, raise your hand if you know somebody who's a recovering alcoholic. Because there's a radical difference, right? What's the difference between someone who struggles with alcohol and someone who's a recovering alcoholic? One thing. The recovering alcoholic has actually named their weakness. They've acknowledged that they're broken. They're acknowledged that they need help. And they can't do it on their own. The same is true for people who suffer from depression, for people who struggle with other issues in their life. But if you meet a recovering alcoholic, I will tell you that once you've met them, within the first 10 to 15 minutes of a conversation with them, they will tell you they're a recovering alcoholic. And they're completely okay with that. They boast in their weakness, because in their weakness, they are strong. When they ignore their weakness, when they hide their weakness, when they drown their weakness, they are nothing. And yet by acknowledging their weakness, they are given strength to conquer the greatest of demons. And yet the desire is still there. Talk to an alcoholic. The desire is there every single day to drink. And yet by acknowledging their weakness, their life has changed. Many of you know in my own life that when I was a young child, particularly in middle school and high school, in my early college, I was an absolute cheater and liar. To the point that I cannot call to mind a test that I took in middle school or in high school or my first 2 years of college that I didn't blatantly cheat on. And it wasn't until my junior year of college that I had this revelation that I was an absolute fraud. That I had desired so much to get good grades, and I had desired so much to look successful, that I had completely justified cheating and lying in my life. I remember very clearly going to confession that day. I had cheated on a test in my first semester of my junior year. I remember going to confession directly afterwards and just being completely overwhelmed with the fact of who am I? And it was me acknowledging my weakness, it was me acknowledging my brokenness to this priest, that my life began to change. And I will tell you that today, I'm 42 years old, and those same temptations are there. To take the easy route. To not want people to know who I truly am. To build a facade that everything is fine. To make things look super easy. To try to get by and not get caught. And I'd imagine when I'm 80 or 90 years old, it'll still be there. God doesn't promise to take away our struggles, always. Sometimes he does, and it's a miracle. But he does promise to give us the strength to endure them. The strength to endure the trials. If you're a teacher or you're a coach, you can tell pretty quickly in working with any young person whether they're receptive or whether they have everything already figured out and they don't need you. The same is true in our relationship with God. God knows whether we're broken and receptive, or he knows whether, in a certain sense, we find him really unnecessary. It's by seeking to be weak, by acknowledging our brokenness, that God is able to work in really tremendous ways. Many of you know I've spent the last 11 days over in Israel. I was in Bethlehem and Nazareth and Jerusalem, and the amazing shrines that were there. I had the opportunity, not to be too self-referential, but I had the opportunity when I was over in the Holy Land to celebrate my 15th anniversary of priesthood. I was in Nazareth on my 15th anniversary, celebrating Mass over the cave where Mary was when the angel greeted her. Very profound experience. Reflecting upon my life as a priest of 15 years, it's been an absolutely amazing journey. When I was a newly ordained priest, I was scoffed at by brother priests as being some young, immature, totally radical, right-winged priest who was most likely going to burn out in 2 or 3 years. Now, 15 years later, I'll be very honest with you that many of my brother priests are scared of me. I intimidate them. I intimidate my own parishioners. I was working with a bunch of young people just a few days ago before I left for the Holy Land. And one of the young persons looked at me and said, "Father, you scare me." I said, "What are you talking about?" It's like, "Father, just look at your eyes." And I'll be honest, like the persona of Father Meyer is intimidating. Like people think that Father Meyer can do anything, and he's like Superman, and he accomplishes all these great things. But if you really look at my life, I would like genuinely look at my life. Why do I spend 2 hours in silent prayer in front of the Blessed Sacrament every single day? Why do I take cold showers? Why do I do penances? Why do I run every day? For one reason. Not because I'm strong, but because I'm weak. The perception of our world is that that's strength. But in the eyes of the gospel, it's dependency on God because of brokenness and weakness. And that's the truth. St. Paul makes it very clear that he boasts of his weakness in order that the power of Christ will dwell within him. I believe that all of us are challenged to break down the facade, to break down the lies that we've told ourselves again and again, that we tell other people that everything's fine, everything's wonderful, and everything's good, but when it's not. It's okay to be broken. It's okay to be weak. And in fact, until we truly acknowledge it, we can't fully live. And until we fully acknowledge it, God can't fill us with his grace, which is his greatest desire. My brothers and sisters, we are called to seek to be weak, and in our weakness to be filled up with Christ. Through his grace, may we do so, and through his grace, may God work tremendous miracles in our lives, calling us the saints that he's inviting us to be.